Mike Camber. I'm the founder here of the BDC, and we want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We're excited about the event. There'll be some people trickling in because I know a lot of people are coming after work, so there'll be a few more people coming. We're particularly, gratified that everybody came tonight. Tim helped get this place going. Tim was my roommate back in the day, and he helped do a lot of the thinking and discussions around this place. And then his death in 2011 was actually the catalyst. Tim and I were saying, well, we don't have the money to start it, And then when he was killed, Jeremiah Zagar and a few other friends said, let's just get some volunteers and just get that place started up. And so that's how the BDC started, and that's why we're here today. So. Real quick, we've got an exhibition. Peter Van Ackmel is opening next week across the street. We've got a gallery about 3 times the size across the street. And then our students, we've got about 100 students in our after-school program. They've got a big show in June, so check that out. And we've got our Latin American Photo Festival in July, so there's a lot coming up. We're back in person, nothing's on Zoom, so come on out, please. So I'm going to read the bios quickly, and then we can get to it. We're pretty informal here, so if you have questions, this is always better when it's a real conversation instead of just people sitting here listening to folks go on. So please interject if there's something you want to know about. And I thought I'll read these bios, and then I've got a clip of Tim. It's about 2 minutes long. It's an informal interview I did with him, me and Shoshana, a bunch of years ago. And so we'll roll that, and then we'll get into some questions real quick. I need my glasses. This is my friend Sebastian. He is an American journalist, author, and filmmaker. He's noted for his book, The Perfect Storm, True Story of Men Against the Sea, creative nonfiction work which became a bestseller. He's also known for his documentary films Restrepo and Korengal, which he filmed with Tim Hetherington. They were filmmaking partners and just and best friends. He also wrote the book War, which was published in 2010. He's been a contributing editor for Vanity Fair and a special correspondent for ABC News. He's received both a National Magazine Award and a Peabody Award. Thank you, Sebastian, for coming up.
Yeah.
And Stephen May is also an old friend. We were saying Stephen Mays was here the night we opened up in 2011. It's great to have you here again. You've been here many times since then, of course. Stephen's an American photographer. He's worked within the fields of photography, art, and journalism since 1987. He was the vice president of Getty Images and the New York head of the 7 Photo Agency from 2004 to 2012. He was secretary to the jury of the World Press Photo Contest, and he is currently the head of the Tim Hetherington Trust. So, great to have you here, Stephen. Lauren Walsh teaches at the New School at NYU, New York University. She's the director of the Gallatin Photojournalism Lab, which has actually sent us some tremendous people over the years. And we're always grateful. They come up here a lot, and some of them volunteer. And
I'm glad to hear they're doing well.
Yeah. She's also the director of Lost Rolls America, a national archive of photography and memory. Walsh's newest book is Through the Lens, The Pandemic and Black Lives Matter. It's just published this year. Great book, really worth looking at. Her other books include Conversations on Conflict Photography from 2019 and Shadow of Memory from last year. She is also published widely in mainstream and academic journals and anthologies. So, thank you. Ira Lupu is a photographer, multimedia artist, and writer born in Odessa, Ukraine. She currently is based in New York City. She is a graduate of the New Media Narratives program at ICP, International Center for Photography. She's also a graduate of Viktor Marchenko's School of Photography in Kyiv. Her ongoing project On Dreams and Screens focuses on the experiences of 6 online sex workers in Ukraine and the US. It explores the place where an electronic body transitions into a real one. Initially supported by the, is it pronounced Sibili?
Tbilisi.
Tbilisi.
Georgia.
Typical American, I don't know how to pronounce it. Photography and Multimedia Museum. The project was published in the British Journal of Photography, Vogue Italia, ID, and exhibited through Copenhagen Photo Festival. She's also been involved in the Bristol Photo Festival, Verzaska Photo Festival, and Odessa Photo Day Group. She'll be exhibited this year at the Rotterdam Photo and Rotterdam Art Week. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and we'll get rolling. Can we, Cynthia, can you help us out and just, we'll see that first clip of Tim. It's just a couple minutes a month.
My parents always moved around when I was growing up. I lived in 12 different places in Britain. I never had a community that I lived with. I'm a chameleon, and what I do now is a reflection of that. Images seem to me the most useful way to try and work out who I am and what is this, what is the world, my relationship to it and my place in it. And so the photographs act as both maps of the subjects that I photograph, but also of myself. They're self-reflexive in that way. And you know, my whole practice, I think, is about a journey to find the world and to find myself in the world. I find that wild photography, I find people that do that really amazing because they can make very beautiful pictures all the time. And it's not the ability that I can make a beautiful picture. I think we all have capacity to make beautiful pictures, but what astounds me about the wild photographers is that they have the energy to do that day in, day out. And that I find increasingly that that for me, photographs or images are emotional investments, and that I'm unwilling to go on the streets here in New York with a camera because I see something, because even that action of making a photograph for me is a confrontation that takes emotional energy, and so I'm not willing to do it. And increasingly, for me, the worry with my work as I get older is that my projects take so much emotional investment. I invest so much of myself emotionally into my work that it's completely exhausting, and then as I get older I worry about how can I have a relationship or have a family and do this, and yet really that's what my work's about. It demands that of me.
I mean, how long can you do it for, do you think? Never ending, or 10 years, 15 years?
I have no idea. I try to play that on my head. When I looked at my work, I kind of thought the other day, it's like, what I do, what I give value to, and I give value by the emotional person. What my work's really about is that emotional closeness, I think. I can bring people a connection to the subject matter in a way that a lot of image makers don't do that, and I can do that. I often think about stopping work, just stopping it. I'm not interested, you know. It's just too much. I'm going to stop it. Too intense. I kind of want to know. Sometimes I want to know life. I want to have this in my life. This thing. In that whenever the day comes when I die, you know, I know that whatever it is in terms of hit by a bus or die peacefully when I'm older, hopefully, or whatever. I think that I'll never kind of think that I didn't have a really fly through experiences. I really kind of saw all kinds of stuff. It's great. It's very satisfying.
Sorry to end on that note. And I think we'll just roll. This is just a group of photos that we've collected that, were on Tim's hard drive. There's work from Afghanistan. There's a lot of work from Libya that I know people have never seen because it's never been published. There's some of his Sleeping Soldier stuff. So we're just going to loop this, and it's not in any particular order. It's not meant to correspond to any specific thing that somebody might be saying. But it's just as a background reference. So. But it might also bring up questions and ideas for you in the audience. So we'll go from there. So one of the things that we really want to talk about tonight is the way the whole digital revolution has transformed where we're at today. And I was wondering if I could ask you, Lauren, about that. Tim shot a lot on film, and he shot a lot of long-term projects, and he did focus on conflict, but in 10 years, things have transitioned so much digitally, and there's just such a profusion of images. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on Tim's work vis-a-vis where we are today. I know it's a very general question, but.
I mean, well, first, also just thank you for having me here, and thank you, everyone. I think with regard to the question of how has the digital landscape transformed the field, a few things come to mind. and I think there are positives and then there are negatives. And so some of the positives would be that there is a greater ability for photojournalists around the globe to get their images out and seen. Whereas historically it was much harder if you were not, let's say, Western, to get your images published widely. So I think that's one of the positives. I think one of the cons, or at least things to be thinking about, is, as you're saying, if there's a kind of really crowded visual landscape, how do you get people to pay attention to your image? And I think there can often be a bit of a cutthroat race to make things more sensational, because that will grab eyes, but then, like, how far does that go? Like, how much sensation do you have to create? And I think the other thing for me in terms of digital is that it, in some regards, means we get the information faster, but it also means that bad actors are more quickly responding to, let's say, the conflict photographer wherever they're based. It's easier to figure out who they are, to try to track them or target them.
Mm-hmm. Can you say more about that in terms of targeting? You're saying just purely because of the digital, the locations involved?
Yeah, I mean, if you're publishing, let's say, in nearly real time, right, your location, even if broadly, like they know where you are based broadly, but we also know for the photojournalist who is in a conflict zone, if journalists are being targeted, they have to be really smart about cyber detection, right, and like turning off certain geolocations so that they can't be picked up by anyone who's trying to monitor where they are.
Right. Yeah, that's something that Tim didn't have to think about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. It opens up a whole line of, I've got a quick question for you. Not a quick question, but, I got to New York in, 1986 or something, and, I began to meet these older photographers, and they were, their whole mantra was, photography is obsolete, photojournalism is dead, and every 10 years, like, I hear this conversation, it's not relevant anymore, you as a Ukrainian, can you talk about how you feel in terms of, how has photography been central to public awareness?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how it's not only the tools that with which we produce photography changed, it's also in this like current like social media era, it's like even the way how we consume information about war and how we even, because let's put it this way, I think this war is probably one of the first in the world that is being not just televised but like streamed. It's not the first one when we have social media. I think it's been like a lot of conflicts, but I think it's characteristic to Ukraine that even in poor areas, like almost every farmer would have like a smartphone. Also for now we have like quality of image is kind of like good. So for example, the way I've been consuming information about war and building my own movie of the war, which by the way, like every person now has like their own movie, right? Because we don't have a straightforward way to consume all of that. It's been mixed between the official information from the media, but also like as a Ukrainian, like I track all the like Telegram channels and like immediate information, air raid alerts and all that stuff. And of course, and every Ukrainian is technically exposed to like enormous amounts of immediate information. Yeah, and then maybe like the most I don't know, like bright or interesting or like sensational clips, of course they get spread like further, but this is like a immensely big part like for viewing this war right now.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing because when I started covering conflict in the 1980s and 90s, until we got to the airport and got our film back to New York or Miami, there were no pictures coming out. So it's completely,
now it's like a split second.
A live feed.
Yeah.
It's astonishing.
Yeah, there was just like a bombing the other day in Odessa where like part of my family is. And it was like the first bombing like of this scale. It was infrastructural, but still, it's kind of like nerve-wracking, especially after months that nothing like was happening. And for me, even though it's forbidden right now to be immediately publishing the consequences of bombings, because it is said that it will help like Russian soldiers to kind of like correct their targets, and the next hit would be more efficient. But for me, it's like technically, of course, when it was like the first bombing and like one Western journalist immediately put everything out, he was extradited from the country already. And at least I was able to see, I'm like, oh, it's not in my neighborhood, but it's in the neighborhood where like a lot of hospitals are, and also my ex-boyfriend lives there, so so maybe that's good. Yeah, so it's like a very different way, yeah,
That's,
consuming
that
things.
gives us a lot to talk about right there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Stephen, you knew Tim well, and you know he was a friend of yours. How do you think he would? Do you think he would be in Ukraine today if he was alive? And how do you think he'd be approaching it? Because Tim never did what the press did. Tim was always doing something else.
Do you know, some of my two most feared words are Tim Wood. We have no idea. He had no idea. I mean, he had strong ideas about how he wanted to get somewhere, and not so much where he wanted to get to, I think. But yes, he would have taken intense interest in it. I think that's for sure. Whether he would have been there or not is we can't really tell. But I think it's you know, Tim was what was one of the many fascinating things about him was he was really he wasn't really about the medium of photography. He used the medium of photography. That's not what drove him. It was really a curiosity. And I think it's, you know, any discussion of photography starts obviously with technology, because it's a technological medium dating back to 1840. But I think it shouldn't end with technology. Obviously, the changes we're seeing at the moment in the media, how it works and everything, are very technologically driven. But I think just in the same way that photographers are likely to be the last people in the world to find out what's happening with the visual image, because we're so mired in the history of photography and the practice of photography, there's all this other stuff happening in imagery which we're not paying attention to. I think the same is true of the media in general. Like, the last people we need to ask about how to fix the media is the media. Because I don't know. And I think that the conversation really lined up here, there should be a psychologist, you know, expert in communication. There should be a game person that gets them to gamify, who understands how how to socialize information. There needs to be a hacker. There needs to be an advertising person. I mean, these are the people who are actually really driving communications at the moment, and how we're all heading. And the media is tagging along behind, sort of, you know, doing what they can to fill yesterday's market. But I think we're looking in the wrong place for our answers on this panel, to be honest. It's because it's stuff that's happening out there which is very fast, very live, technologically driven. But what we forget in that is that there really isn't an us and them situation. At this particular moment, you know, where information has become so politicized and polarized, there was a feeling of us and them. It's like, you know, I believe this and they believe that. Truth is, we all work on the same psychology, and if I'm going to be critical of anyone for how they think, I have to apply that same criticism to myself, because we all boil in the same pot. You know, we're all humans, and I think that's really, really important to remember, that there are no monsters out there. There are people doing monstrous things, but we're all cut from that same cloth. And I think that's really what we need to focus on, rather than technology, which separates us, you know, or combines us, or whatever, or political attitudes, which are very obviously separated at the moment, and particularly, you know, in Ukraine at the moment. It's not really about the separations. It has to be about looking for the similarities, and then figuring out how is that affecting me and my reception of information. What do I do with that information? Rather than saying I'm sitting on some kind of high hill with an overview of what's going on, and I can see this, this, and this. I'm part of that scene.
Right.
We all are.
Right.
We have to include ourselves in that.
Right. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Sebastian, I was going to ask you. I mean, you've written books on war, made movies about war.
Yeah.
What is your impression of what's happening in Ukraine through images and video?
Well, the first war I was in was Sarajevo, was in Bosnia in 1993, and it reminds me a lot of that. I mean, first of all, you have a professional army that's encircling, bombarding cities, trying to lay siege to them, using snipers to terrify the population, to drive them out, using, it seems that they're using rape, sort of random execution. I mean, all the things that made Bosnia sort of so newsworthy and horrifying when I was there, they seemed to be doing it again. Kosovo was the same way. I was there as well. And the power of the image to sort of shake the world morally and wake the world up and get the world to act had a huge impact on the war in Bosnia, and still is today. And this is rusty. My mind is rusty, and this is a long time ago. But if I remember correctly, one of the things that sort of galvanized a direct NATO ultimatum and ultimately action was just another mortar round landed in a marketplace and killed a bunch of people, but there happened to be a news crew right there. And the footage was absolutely horrific. And it recorded, like, from the first moment, wounded people dragging themselves towards the camera, and just unthinkable things you can't unsee, just awful. And that affected the war on a military level, right? Because the world, NATO, was pushed. Basically, like, we can't. It presented the world with something that it couldn't live with, and obviously that has just happened in Ukraine. I mean, these ghastly executions in seems to be the towns around Kiev. All of a sudden, Europe, the EU is talking about no more Russian coal, no more this and that. I mean, it has real consequences, and quite quickly. And I don't think, I'm a writer, right? And I believe in words, and they have enormous power in certain circumstances, but I don't believe an article about that would do the same thing. I don't think it'd have the same effect. Same information, et cetera. I don't think it'd have the same. There was something about those lonely bodies, like in the streets, that just you can't look at them. You can't accept them.
Tim was also very interested in, kind of the universality of war, and he would talk about Homer and, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and, we would have these arguments, and it's interesting that you're seeing the same dynamics play out today as, and I was with you in Monrovia when the Capitol was surrounded, being bombarded, and the presence of the press helped to provoke
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Tim was very interested in the self-image of combatants, right? So that, in Liberia, and even with American soldiers, and certainly in Libya, where he lost his life, these young guys, mostly men, were were aware of what they looked like, and they were aware that there was a way to look like what they thought a fighter looked like. And that image was taken from Hollywood, which in turn took the image from reality, which then took it from Hollywood. There's this sort of feedback loop, and so that there were fighters in Libya, and I mean, this from West Africa, where it's clear that it's coming right out of American media, and either a kind of Rambo thing or a kind of rap, whatever, gangster, whatever. It's a sort of like collage of American visuals for a sort of ultra male, ultra aggressive sort of image, and Tim was fascinated by how that feedback loop of image and fighter and image, and I'll just sort of end with this. He was also quite interested, and it's really interesting how in wars the combatants often adopt the style and the clothing of the people they're fighting. So American special forces are growing their beards out and basically look like Afghans. And now the Taliban are doing everything they can to look like American soldiers with all the cast-off uniforms. And on the American front, I've written about this, on the American frontier, there was a lot of cross sort of emulation going, across the white native divide. And pretty quickly on the frontier, the Caucasians were carrying tomahawks and scalping knives, and not wearing pants, wearing breech clouts and moccasins, and the native people were wearing overcoats, and Tim was absolutely fascinated by that sort of like cultural exchange that happens, and particularly in the sort of visual level that happens in war.
Right. Lauren, I feel like some of what he said ties into some of what you've written about.
I mean, I think, because I also am seeing resonances with the Bosnian War, but I would have a slightly different spin on it, because it's a nearly 4-year war with a ton of coverage and imagery, and it wasn't really until after the Makarli massacre and also the Srebrenica massacre, where it was 8,000 men and boys in the space of a few days were just rounded up and executed. So for all the images that were taken, including of concentration camps, we didn't militarily intervene for a really long time, and that's one of the biggest critiques. And then NATO essentially did airstrikes and ended it very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I am someone who may be a little less questioning of I like asking the critical questions, but I also think that the journalism, the photojournalism is vital. And I think it's really important, all the documentation we've been seeing out of Ukraine, and it really, it has not pushed us yet, obviously, to do any military intervention, but I do think you're right in what you're saying, that the images that are just coming out of Bucha have changed the conversation, right? And now, although we've been hearing descriptions of war crimes for close to 2 months, now we're seeing the war crimes, and now it's, you know, the upping the sanctions. I think some European countries are, despite being part of NATO, are shifting from giving defense weaponry to giving offensive weaponry, which is a shift in the stated goals at the beginning. So I think it remains to be seen. Are we really going to get militarily involved? I don't know, but the images also, if this rolls forward and if there is war crimes trials at the ICC, the images will be incredibly important for that as well.
Right.
I have a question about that, actually.
Sure.
Because it's about who controls the meaning. I feel like the meaning gets more obliterated because of the fusion of the images and all this live stuff happening there, but you see deep fakes and all types of manipulation going on, things that are happening or not happening. So I feel like the idea of the meaning is looser, and then it's got to be corroborated by a news organization, that who supported that news organization in the first place, who's making the editorial decisions to go do. So I feel like I'm losing meaning in what I'm seeing and what I'm understanding like never before, and I feel like for me that's like the visual shift looking at the situation in Ukraine. I think we're having like almost like an ontological shift in what the meaning is of this journalism and war photography for me.
Do you have anything do you want to respond to that?
I think actually one of the tools of propaganda is to make you think that you're going crazy a little bit. So I think partially it's being used maybe consciously, but also coming back to what Sebastian said about this image of a masculine soldier, I think it's also interesting how this is being consciously exploited by also like the Russian side now with the Chechen squad, who like it's been proven that they don't have any like real military, not excuse, but like power. They don't really do anything at the battlefield, but they're like dolled up, dressed up. They are really like, they can say like scary things. They are like scary looking, and they say that like basically Ramzan Kadyrov has like, he's now like a social media superstar. He's basically the social media manager of the Russian side of the war, and we see how this imagery is like being you know, exploited consciously and to create this like Syed, right?
Information warfare is basically what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure that addressed exactly what you were.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
this is in addition.
I mean, obviously I support Ukraine, but I'm seeing it from the Ukrainian side. There's also a very, like Stephen mentioned, like sort of marketing. There's this manipulation going on.
Right.
Very potent, valuable, but it's manipulation nonetheless to present our side to, you know, Zelensky giving a speech at the Grammy Awards. I found that a little surreal. I mean, these are not accidents. This is a very intelligent approach to a very postmodern idea of what war is now.
Right.
They're framing it and teaching us and showing us.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel like, I don't know, I'm just, it's
I think
very different experience
Zelensky's
watching this all unfold right now.
Yeah, as Zelensky's like has a vast experience in like video production, so and his whole like
You know, can I ask something? Hi, my name's Sandy. This disinformation that you brought, propaganda, whatever word you use, I was there, you know, January 6th, I was there.
Mhm.
And I talked to people,
I was also there.
oh, you
Yeah.
I didn't see you there.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
you talk to people that have been covering the magazines for like 5 or 6 years now, video. And you talk to them and I go, oh, well, it was Antifa, you know, it was like, and I was in Charlottesville, I know who Antifa is. And how does anybody else deal with it? It makes me nuts. And I think that's the purpose of it.
You're saying the people that were there were claiming the violence was by
No,
Antifa?
I was there.
Right. No, but the
So
people you were
they claim it was a, what do you call it, well, not tourist, but they say it was a demonstration, crisis actors,
Right.
yeah, crisis actors a lot, yeah. And they're using that in Ukraine. They say that those bodies aren't real, they're
Yeah.
placed there. But it's like a cult of certainty
Mhm.
that you can't break through, and in many, and I was, I've been front line with a lot of the George Floyd and all that, and then people go, well, that's not what happened, because they're watching TV.
Mhm.
And I say, but I was there, and I just don't, it's just a weird problem of these days that we're in, huh?
Which, to Sandy's point and to your point, is different than the confusion. It's a
Yeah.
very different but very powerful.
That's
part of
it.
the
Well,
play
that's
that's
the point of it,
happening.
isn't it, to confuse?
Honestly, sometimes you and I spend some time reading the Russian side, and I'm like,
Yeah,
I feel like
Sure.
I start having doubts. It's very
Right.
effective in many ways.
They don't, but they don't, I mean, one of the famous truisms about propaganda is that it doesn't have to convince you, it just has to create doubt.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Right.
Ah,
Right.
that's good, I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, it's
Right.
very,
Okay,
that's an age-old issue.
that's
On,
good.
on the theme of performance and the efficacy of images, I mean, pictures do change things, there's no doubt about that. And I just came across an example last week, in fact, from 1993, going way back from Bosnia, of how I was actually on a jury that we made an award to a photograph of somebody being rounded up at gunpoint and ultimately shot. And what I heard last week, all these years later, is that he was just picked randomly from a crowd of already arrested people for $500 was paid to the police force in the Serbian cops, who produced this person for the performance, which then won a prize, which then influenced other photographers. And that picture itself was made in mimicry of a prize-winning picture. So the impact of the picture is for real. Who is copying it for why, of course, then becomes extremely questionable. And that notion of belief, and when you talk about a cult of certainty, I'm equally in that cult. I'm very certain about what I believe.
Oh, me too.
But exactly, so I think that I have to identify myself on that same map, which is
So you said a really great thing, because I don't want to hog the day, about that we are all kind of the same. I mean, I try to do this. I did this in Charlottesville. I said, if we don't start talking to each other, we are going to have a civil war. We're all going to die. We're going to have to, when I talk to them, I say, look, I'm not so bad. I'm the enemy. I'm the enemy of the people, right? I'm just, I'm a liberal, a libtard, or whatever I am. And if they get an experience to see that, then I get a chance, but it's so hard.
This is very hard.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in what you said about the more imagery we have, the certainty we have. And so maybe this is, we are in many ways playing into the hands of others who are trying to influence us. And all we can do is talk about it well and respond as best we can.
Lauren, can I ask you another question about, I'm interested in this idea that the gatekeepers have kind of broken down in a certain way, and this speaks to something that you said also, Maria. And actually, we should probably ask this of Alice and Elizabeth, because they've been editors for decades. But there were, when I was a kid, I had to wait for Time or Newsweek to arrive each week, so that that was the only photograph I might see. I mean, there was a black and white photo on the cover of the Portland Press Herald, but that was it. Like, I didn't actually have access to images, and now they're just coming. There's just this, deluge. We don't know. We can't verify them. We don't know if they're real. We don't know if they're coming from. Do you have any thoughts on how? I mean, despite this, the images from Ukraine have been quite powerful. Do you have? I'm not sure that I have a question here, or just a thought, but.
I mean, and maybe to the point that you were raising before about meaning and context, I am seeing on social media a flood of extremely graphic images, and they are not getting published in legacy media, right? There is a distinction between, some of them are, but there's some really graphic stuff by the photojournalists who I respect, and it's going up on social media, and so that I do find at least something to think about. In terms of my role as a professor, all of my students, like the New Yorker called this the TikTok war, and it absolutely is. That is where they are getting all of their information. It's from, it's not, like Instagram is like old. I'm old with Instagram. It's TikTok.
And I think that's really vital, and we're sitting here as though we're some sort of mediators. Well, that's an historic role. We're not mediators really at all. And as has always been the case, but I think it's only becoming recognised now, is that really the responsibility for photograph lies with the viewer, not with the photographer. And it's up to all of us to be looking and understanding, being very critical of what we're seeing. But we are now viewers as much as we are practitioners, and I think that we have to adopt that and accept that role in ourselves as being ultimately important. Because the value of the picture was only ever valuable if it was responded to or somebody reacted to it.
Right.
The media was somehow seen to be the process, but it wasn't. It was always about the viewer, and now that's more clear than it ever was. I don't want to let the evening pass without at least mentioning though the content initiative, the Content Authority Initiative. Authenticity. Authenticity and authority. The Content Authenticity Initiative, which is initiated from Adobe and is now getting huge traction across the industry. I think it's a deeply problematic approach, but they are fundamentally trying very earnestly to address this issue of what is credible in a picture, and at least making steps to identify who, what, where, when. Questions of why and what's been cropped and how the caption is, and all the rest of it will remain unanswered. But there's something very important happening there. But what I fear with that is that they're trying to talk. The issue starts with technology, and they're trying to answer it with technology. And I don't think that can work. The technology takes a step forward. I think the effort that they're making to introduce credibility into what we see is really important. But it's not going to be the technology that saves us. It's going to be us that saves us, if anyone.
Right. I could argue with you all night about this. I think I run into people all the time, including relatively educated people, whatever that means, who don't know the difference between the New York Post and the New York Times, or a Murdoch paper and the Marshall Project. I mean, literally. I like to tell the story about a woman I knew who was quite educated, and she launched into this thing about how much Obama hated the environment. And I was like, really? And I said, where are you getting this? And she sent me this kind of like conglomeration of just tidbits that she had put together off the internet. She had no idea where they were coming from. She didn't care. Some of them were actually extreme left, some were extreme right. You're talking about a level of media literacy that unfortunately I think I agree it should. It's something that should be taught in the schools. It should be like the way they taught civics or something. Because it's crucial to our future.
There are national campaigns towards that, actually, towards bringing it into middle school and high school across the entire United States.
I'd love to.
And actually, the CAI is partnering on that.
Great.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, we need it.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I answer your question?
Yes. Thank you. Alice was the director of photography at Time for.
Acting, just to be accurate, instead of for 10 months. But and I'm not a photo editor now at a publication, and I'm very happy not to be. I spent many years with Bosnia being the first war that I worked on. Because I think with Ukraine, it would be really incredibly hard if you have, with the kinds of budgets that magazines have, where you have one photographer to put on assignment. Who is that person? And I think we're at a time where, like back in the ancient age of like the early 2000s or mid 2000s, or you turn to Tim, or you think, how do I do this at a news magazine? How do I get somebody who has a different eye, a different aesthetic? And with Ukraine, I feel like the wires actually are where I am viscerally moved. Like Evgeny Malaletka and Maripol.
Yeah.
That's just like incredible photojournalism, like really showing that photojournalism is essential. So I do wonder, like with the very aesthetic kind of stylized photographers, what they can do in this covering this conflict. And also, I have another question, maybe even for you, Mike.
why, and I keep thinking about this, having worked for many years covering Iraq and a little bit less of Afghanistan, because we didn't touch Afghanistan as much, why those pictures make people turn away, and why these pictures are making people pay attention.
Yeah, it's a tough question.
So whoever,
Yeah.
you could answer that.
Well, I think, I worked in Iraq for years, off and on for 9 years, and I think, I used to talk to Joao Silva, my buddy. We would always go in together when we could, and, at one point I said, when is somebody going to take that one photo, like the Eddie Adams photo that turned people against Vietnam? It's a bit of a myth, but there was some truth to it, or the Napalm Girl photo, Nick got. And Joao said, the problem isn't that we haven't taken the photo, the problem is that we've taken too many.
That's what I think.
Yeah. And
I
it was
think
just
it was
this
the
flood.
beginning of streaming, although you're saying that this is the streaming war. I feel like Iraq
Yeah.
was a way in which, and there was no gatekeepers really on online galleries, and that's where people were looking at pictures.
That was the beginning, yeah.
But there are pictures that are in my mind, like Stefan Zaklin, the Marine or soldier
Unbelievable.
lying on the kitchen, blood, stream of blood,
Unbelievable.
that are not remembered
Right,
as iconic
yeah.
because of that thing that you're talking about.
Let's not forget that Eddie Adams was a pro-war photographer. He was horrified by the anti-war uptake of that image.
Yeah.
So
He hated that his photo had become an anti-war image.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, he was I think he was a former U.S. Marine. He was very, very pro-war. Yeah. I knew him a bit when I got to New York. But I think, the spring of 2003, I think, I really think that was the last gasp of kind of traditional journalism. Everybody went to Iraq. There were hundreds of photographers there, at least through the summer of '03. And I think there was, amazing work done and just thousands and thousands of images coming back. And it continued for a long while. And I also think it was a very complex war, and people don't like complexity. I think people I wouldn't say they like Ukraine, but I would say Ukraine is good versus evil. And that's the way it's seen. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but these are people, it's hard not to take a side. These are people going about their lives being, murdered while riding their bikes, while, in a basement taking shelter, just to pour artillery down on a non-military target. This is unbelievable. We haven't seen it on this scale. Iraq was a super complex war. We did a lot of things. I could talk about it for hours, but it was a very complex war. We unleashed a civil war. There was a conflict between Sunni and Shia. Iran was involved. The U.S. policy kept evolving. It was complex in a way that people didn't want to deal with. And Ukraine and Russia is something that we can. There's a guy with a black hat and a guy with a white hat.
But also, can I just jump in? They look like us.
Of course.
That's right, I think it Rwanda in '94.
Syria.
Yeah. But Syria is a super complex war. Look, there's so many different factions in Syria.
But I think it's powerful
Yeah.
that could be me.
They're Europeans.
Yeah.
It's neighbors. It's technically us, right?
Yeah.
It's familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much familiar.
I think Iraq and Afghanistan also made Americans feel incredibly guilty because what was the high percentage of Americans supported those wars? And then when you're watching people getting killed, you just want to play Nintendo instead of looking at what you supported.
Mm. But they were both, again, I don't want to go into too long, but they were both wars where there were no good answers. We unleashed some holy shit, and then we were stuck. We couldn't get out because it would get worse, and we couldn't stay because it kept getting worse. We were totally fucked. So I feel like, I'm not excusing it. I remember, Dexter Filkins, this was like 2000, the war had been going on in 2005, 2006, and he came back to Baghdad, and he'd just been home on leave in Miami. And people said, what have you been doing? He said, I'm in Baghdad, for the New York Times. And people said, is that war still going on? People completely turned it out, and it only took a couple of years. So, but I want to ask. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's just a small element that actually this is also something that happened with the Ukrainian war, because we actually had war for like 8 years going on in a different way, but still it was like we were kind of like
And
almost
nobody
offended
was-
that like it's Europe's forgetting
Nobody
war.
was paying attention.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I wonder with, with, if the war is gonna continue in Donbass,
Mm-hmm.
will people start to turn them off? Because it's about other ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to depend if Zelensky accepts that as an agreement for neutrality. And then I think we're already starting to hit a bit of a fatigue. I think people are, like, for what, like 5 weeks straight, it was the only headline. And then Will Smith slaps Chris Rock. And that's dominant. So I think we're hitting the turn.
Stephen, I had a question for you, and I'm afraid of your answer, but I know we're going to disagree on this. But you always have good things to say. The New York Times, I don't know if anybody saw it, my friend Lindsay took a really powerful photo of the dead family who had been killed and hit by a mortar shell. And the New York Times did a daily piece about it where they interviewed her. And I think about half of the piece was given over to justifying that if they had asked permission, the family would have given permission. And it struck me that this was never a conversation that we had 10, 15 years ago when I was working as a photojournalist. You saw it, you published it, and people said, great, it's evidence, it's there. But you could see that the New York Times, in my opinion at least, should probably cut the tape on this, was terrified that we've used these people's image in a disrespectful way without their permission. And that's a relatively new conversation. Can you tell me how you feel about that?
And that fear was led by Lindsay, who made the picture. I mean, she was there, she had to make it, she responded, but then felt very ambivalent about its application. And the application of the picture is really important here. It's not the making of the picture, it's how it's used, of course, then becomes the key. But I feel very difficult about asking people's consent, because it's, I don't want to be misrepresented by some idiot with a camera who doesn't know what they're doing and all the rest of it. At the same time, I'm not sure it's entirely healthy for information that I should approve the image either. And it takes it to the extreme. I mean, you work at the White House also. It's if every image is approved, you end up with political imagery. I mean, it's you can't have it otherwise. So consent, knowing consent is really important. But I don't think you can have information in that sense driven by the subjects of the pictures, although we are now making the pictures. It's a really complex weave of what's going on. But I think consent can't be the answer. I think it has to be a factor of consideration. But it can't be it.
Right. Did you have something to say about that, Laura?
No, just I completely agree actually with what Stephen is saying. I think one of the things that in terms of, let's say, us often finding out about the journalists who have been killed in Ukraine is family notification has held information a little bit, and then it goes out like a day later, which isn't the same as getting consent, but it's another aspect of thinking about. And I say that because it was very dramatic to me when, I'm not sure if it was in the Daily Podcast or if I just read it in one of the articles, but to learn that the father who survived that mortar shell found out on Twitter that his family had been killed. So it's I mean, it kind of goes back to your first question, the update of the digital landscape, and what does it mean for the movement of images and the reception of images.
Right. Sebastian, I had a quick question for you, maybe not so quick, but I'm curious, do you remember conversations with Tim around Restrepo? Because Restrepo, when I saw it, really kind of changed the way I thought about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It focused on the soldiers in a way that was sympathetic, but it also showed them killing civilians by accident. It showed them in these completely hopeless situations. A small group of guys controlling a valley like the size of Delaware. I mean, it was just, you could kind of see the pointless insanity.
Yeah, I mean, when Tim came in to the projects, I'd already taken a trip out there, and I had sort of formulated this idea in my mind. Like, I want to primarily write, but I was also shooting video in the hopes that maybe I could figure out how to make a documentary. I wanted to portray a platoon in combat as they experienced it. So the soldiers were not interviewing generals about their own war. They weren't talking to ambassadors. There was no big picture for them. It was very much like their reality, and that's it. And of course, soldiers are totally subjective because they have a very intense agenda, which is to not get killed and go home and complete their mission, right? So they're totally subjective. They're not trying to be fair and balanced about the Taliban, right? And so that was the project that I conceived of. Tim came in and in a few months into the deployment, and we immediately hit it off. And I sort of explained what I was trying to do. And Tim immediately fell in love with the project. I immediately fell in love with Tim. Like we were just such a good pair, journalistically. And we became best friends and embarked on this. And the conversation was, basically we're not reporters. Like, we're documenting something, and we're not only are we not trying to be objective, we're actively trying to be subjective. We're trying to get as close as we can to these soldiers and see the war through their eyes. One of the things and had these guys done something morally reprehensible, because we really liked those guys, and they liked us, and our survival depended on them. I mean, there was all the things that would cloud someone's objectivity was going on. And had they done something morally reprehensible, it would have been extremely hard for me, psychologically, emotionally, to deal with it. The civilians that were killed, were killed. It was an airstrike. I mean, these, they're not, whatever. That's just completely above their pay grade, and they're riflemen basically. And but had they done something that occasionally happens in war, even with U.S. forces, a kind of revenge killing, or clearly, not being careful with civilians or even gloating. I mean, there was the one thing that got uncomfortable was that the one guy they gloated about, they killed a guy on the other side of the hill that was shooting at them, but they killed him like pretty intensely, and they were sort of whooping. They could see it through the LRAS, this sort of optical device, and they were sort of whooping, really like whooping. Yeah, I flew, whatever, saying some ugly stuff, and I asked and it just made my skin crawl, and it made Tim's skin crawl, right? And I asked one of the guys, I was like, what is that about? Because it was kind of ugly, what you guys were saying about that guy who got killed. And he's like, listen, I know, but for us, it's one less guy who's going to kill our buddy. One less guy out there who might kill our buddy. So that's what we were cheering about. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, okay, I got it.
Life reduced down to its most basic
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Maybe also kind of something, it was like an othering as well, like an additional layer of, like, I don't know, dehumanizing a bit as a coping skill,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a horrific,
Right.
even though the guy was shooting at that, of course, so they have to defend it, but ultimately just like, ended someone's life, so maybe it's that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the result of that thinking, right? I mean, soldiers dehumanize the enemy because otherwise they have the moral burden of killing humans, right? And these aren't decisions they're making, right? There's the decisions that we're making as a country to have this war, and the soldiers are carrying it out. So that dehumanization is psychologically necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that fascinated me about Restrepo, I talked to some people. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's really a great film. I talked to some people who were like, God, that's the most powerful anti-war film I've ever seen. And also Republicans and soldiers loved the film. They thought it was a pro-war film.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I mean, I get that. Like when I give talks and stuff, some guy will come to me and says, "I joined the service because I saw Restrepo and I just really wanted to," And I've heard that over and over and over again. Yeah, and equally, I've heard over and over and over again. It's like the ultimate critique of the war, and of course, everyone wants to know how did we mean it. And Jim and I were very united in that. Like, look, we're journalists. We're not for or against anything, really. And that's in that political sense. And but we want to show you, the world so that you can make your own decisions. My wife said something really, really smart about theater, which I realize is also about journalism. She said, theater or journalism doesn't tell you what to think. It tells you what to think about. And that's that's just like a tool. It's like a Leatherman tool for opening complex questions about journalism. Like, what to think about. And then it's your job. Then now you have to do the work.
Right. Also, one other thing I wanted to ask, and I don't know if anybody wants to respond to this, but we've seen some of the Sleeping Soldiers series tonight, and Tim was living in the bunkers with these guys, and he would kind of crawl around when they were sleeping and take their picture. And I remember you saying, you were like, Tim, what the fuck are you doing? And he was like, don't you get it? This is how their mothers, think of them.
The mothers see them, yeah.
Yeah, their mothers see
Yeah.
them. I wonder if there would be like the room for the complexity of photos like that today, or if you think that the landscape is so instantaneous and so, because those are photos that.
I think actually something like that is happening already. For example, there is like a really popular, I would not say trend, but it definitely got this like meme quality to it. Is like pictures of Ukrainian soldiers with cats or animals. It's like a separate trend, let's put it this way. And honestly, like even myself, like when I see it, I feel very like emotionally invested into it. So I think this is something that is already happening. Yeah.
And it gets used as a tool too, because
Exactly,
we've all
yeah.
seen the sweet Russian soldier photos that the propaganda machine is pushing.
Yeah.
They're just lambs, So I mean, it's a complicated equation.
Yeah. And the destroyed shelters and like zoos and everything. But also to Sebastian's point about, I really wanted to bring up this aspect of that today actually there is also even an opportunity to be kind of like involved in this moment of cheering, of killing the enemy, because there is also like a lot of footage released from Bayraktar drones, and you can actually like even hear like the soldiers like cheering when they hit the targets, and
Right.
you can't help but you also like feel kind of like,
Yeah.
happy or sad if you're Russian. So
Right.
yeah.
Right, and the famous Saigon execution, the Eddie Adams photo from Vietnam, was so shocking because we had never really seen the moment of death, and now it's actually quite routine.
Right.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons like all this like consistent footage and media and all types of different media is why more and more young people keep signing up to the army these days. Like every day I get like news about like some of my friends like signing up, who like normally I would never think as like a person to go to the war. So
There is an intrinsic issue with photography, which is about the aestheticization of just putting a frame around something. You can't make a picture without an aesthetic judgment. And in last week of his journaling, and before he died, Tim was thinking about this. He was talking about the smell of burning flesh, and he was having to make these pictures that people want to look at. And he had to make these beautiful pictures of this complete horror. But this truth and the conflict between reporting and truth is very, very stark. Is that if you report the full horror of it, nobody's going to look. Talk about people turning away, and what's the point if you show something so horrific you can't look at it? That's a very interesting point you made about this. Actually, we've started looking at it now, and what is that difference? But there is an intrinsic thing with photography, which is that you have to make an aesthetic judgment, and you have to make it appealing for people to look at, and what you're actually photographing is not appealing in the slightest.
Yeah.
So there's a grind there. Which,
There is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's at the heart of a lot of, Larry Burroughs photos from Vietnam, and a lot of people that just take these stunningly, they almost look like theater sets, but you know that they're real. They're so beautiful. Yeah, in Iraq, I went out. I mean, probably the worst photos I ever took. The sun was just coming up. There was this beautiful golden light illuminating, the bodies and the helicopter and the smoke. It's like being in this amazing, so beautiful, and there's just no way to make it ugly, really. I mean, I took some ugly photos, but the New York Times didn't print those. But anyway, it's another story. Do we have any? Yeah.
Yeah, that was really good panel. I'm curious what your sense is in the case of whose photographs are actually singing. I'm working as a photo editor now, and I'm sifting through thousands of photos a day. Something that I've noticed, looking through all this stuff, is that some of the most lasting, effective images for me come from Ukrainian photographers who are getting picked up by the wires. And at the same time, with a lot of legacy media organizations, and this is not to cast aspersions on anybody, but they're relying on a lot of the same photographers who have defined conflict coverage for like the last 10 years, say. And I think we need that balance of perspectives, but we're really seeing like an uplifting of folks who are from there and we're getting a proximity that may be lost from Western eyes.
yeah, exactly. But on the other hand, like yesterday I looked on the front page of New York Times, like digitally, and there was like
The slideshow.
like 15 pictures, just like, scrolling, like, seeing, what's the word?
Slideshow.
Yeah, slideshow, exactly, yeah. And all the 15 photographs were taken by like Western photographers on the front page, and only one was taken, like I was actually trying to Google this person. Seemingly he's like a Russian AP photographer who's mostly doing
Yeah.
like the,
And those
I would
are
say-
really interestingly captioned as the People's Republic of Donetsk.
Mhm.
That's how AP is referring to his pictures now.
Alexei.
Yeah,
something.
Alexei, I forget his last name.
Yeah.
You know, also I have a bunch of young photographer friends, very talented, but haven't really made it, yet, so to speak. And they've self-funded, they've gone over there, they're there now, they've come back, they've returned. And they're taking some extraordinary pictures that are so moving and so, like, they look like Rembrandts, And it gives them an opportunity, it's kind of like a democratic, social media has given it like a democratic
Exactly.
playing field, right? Where you don't have
Yeah.
to be like the
Yeah,
top of the fold guy,
yeah, for better or for worse, yeah, yeah.
Right,
absolutely.
right.
Well, it might be democratized in that sense, but if they're self-funding, they don't have a security detail with them. They're not in an armored vehicle.
I know.
Like, it's really, really expensive.
I know.
Yeah.
But they're doing it, they're risking their lives, they're going to Bupa and, they're going, I don't know if you can get into Mariupol at all, but,
Yeah,
it's just, it's fascinating to watch, because I know they're my colleagues, and, what I do. And, they just had to go there, but they're being, all of a sudden their stuff is being seen and they're
Yeah.
being recognized for the great photographers I know them to be,
yeah. Egypt, I could be wrong about this, but, I did a story for the Times way back, and Egypt was really, I think, the first conflict where people were just taking cell phones and just getting a bus ticket and going. It was the first time I'd ever heard of that. 18, 19, 20 years old, and they were like, I want to be a photojournalist, I've got a cell phone, and I'm going to Egypt. And that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I'm sorry, you had a question, and then Alice? Yeah.
Well, I have a question similar to the photo editor comment. Is that also like on a sort of a big macro level? Like we never see anything coming out of Yemen. What was the last conflict photography we saw coming out of Yemen? Who are the young Yemen photographers showing us the devastation that's been going on there?
Yeah.
It's one of the most dangerous countries on the face of the earth for journalists. So local journalists will
But
be.
even local people, I've not even seen.
No, that's what I mean. They will be targeted and arrested, harassed, possibly killed. So it's a very dangerous place for journalists. And then again, on the finances, it's really hard to get outside journalists because it's very expensive for a while. I mean, there was a lot of coverage in 2018, which is now a number of years back. I believe it's the largest humanitarian crisis on the face of the earth, right? The famine there. So yeah, the question is absolutely correct. Like, why is Ukraine?
They have smartphones, right? And people have smartphones. People are communicating with each other. So where are we seeing these images that are being taken?
It's probably very dangerous for them to put those images out. But I do think you're right that there could be more report. I mean, it's not a major American headline.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah. Good question. Alice, did you?
Well, it was similar to kind of that question of, recently on Twitter I saw someone post, young photographers should not go if you don't have an assignment.
Right.
Stay home. This isn't a portfolio building exercise. And I just wondered how any of you feel about this, the balance between people going who do harm as photojournalists and
Right.
the importance of photojournalism.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. I mean,
Could you elaborate do harm?
Well, I think in recent years there's
Of such.
conversation and scrutiny
Yeah.
about photojournalism really causing harm, and as you pointed out, places can be targeted
Right.
now because of
right.
whatever.
Footage being
A lot of that loops into what was said earlier about performance, because there's a romance and a mythology associated with being on
Right.
the front line,
Oh, yeah.
which is attractive from a distance. Not so much when we're there, but
Yeah. Robert Capa really set the standard.
yes.
He really fucked stuff up for
I
everybody.
hate that saying.
Yeah.
It's so dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, in the 1930s, he was just so dashing and so charismatic and so handsome, and he had a beautiful girlfriend, and they went to Spain, and we've been following them for 100 years now. Yeah, but I will say I went to Haiti in my early 20s to cover an election. I didn't expect violence. I didn't go there to make a name or anything, but I suppose I did. I mean, it was an opportunity to go and cover an election, and I did have an assignment, but I was 23 years old or something, you know, and I ended up in the middle of a bloodbath, you know, just, you know, children being hacked to death with machetes and such, and, you know, it's hard to say what makes that different from somebody today who's 23 years old and has a cell phone or something and is going in, you know. I think it was certainly much harder for me to get my images out. I mean, it took me weeks to get back and develop my film and take prints to editors and such, but I don't know that makes me any morally better than somebody today who's 23 and has a cell phone and wants to go. I think the question is, are you endangering other people? For me, that's really like one of the key questions, and you frequently are. If you don't know what you're doing, and you're hiring a driver, you're going around with local people, whatever, on a shoestring, you're endangering everybody around you.
And putting it up on Twitter. I mean, to
Yeah.
your point,
Right.
I know guys that I just know, and they'll just put stuff out on Twitter, and it could be really, you could endanger lives, saying
Right.
this, people are here
Exactly.
in need.
Yeah.
Great, send your bombs, you know.
Yeah, exactly. You had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering who are the types of people that should be going out and like producing and bringing in this media, because as a person like with an iPhone and social media, a lot of the influx that I see with imagery, especially specifically like with Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, it's a lot of things that I feel like don't carry a lot of deep meaning, especially because a lot of the media that I see is first-hand experiences from like people that are my age or slightly older. So who are the types of people that should be reporting this media, and who are the types of people that should be bringing it in and talking about it inside of this kind of area?
Does anybody want to tackle that? That's a tough one.
That's a heavy question.
I mean, I think it depends what the intention is, right? So if you're there as the journalist, you have one intention. If you're there as the civilian who's documenting, you have another intention. If you're there as the forensics expert collecting information for a war crimes trial, you have another intention. But I think this maybe comes back to the media literacy, whoever raised it first, right? Like, kind of asking the critical questions and understanding the context and thinking through all of that.
Well, I was just wondering because a lot of the issue now is the desensitization of these images and how they don't carry deep meaning because we see so many of them, because it's so often we see people being wounded on the streets and like bodies being shown on camera. Like I feel like my question is more catered to like, what are the types of people that we feel like do have the credentials to produce this type of media and then bring it in and talk about it, versus like bringing out, like I remember you talking about younger photographers going in, how it's not necessarily a younger person's job to go out and produce this type of photography, even though young people can produce that type of photography. So I don't know, it's an open question, not a fully formed question.
But I don't think it's age. I mean, I think if you look at, you know, Catherine Leroy, who went into Vietnam in 1966, I think she was 21 years old or 22 years old. She became a legend. She just did decades of amazing work. I don't think it's the age. You know, I think it's, you know, as you say, it's the intention. Are you there? Are you serious about it? Sure, you had a question?
Yeah, I guess piggyback on that, like the mental makeup. I mean, for everybody, you've been exposed to so much. You see the images, you know, like the PTSD aspect, and does the art shield you from that in some way, or does it, you know, inevitably seep in? Because your life is in danger, like you're as close as you could be to without like pulling the trigger in some of these instances. So like, what's the psychology behind that? Does that separate some of the greats, I guess, or?
I think Tim has a good movie about it, right? The Diary.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, for me, I mean, just from shooting video and from recording words, like, it didn't insulate me later, like in the moment maybe. But later it didn't, and it even incurred a kind of feeling of sort of moral debt. Like, there's a lot of different ways of looking at this profession, but one way to look at it is you are making a living off of the suffering of the world. And God forbid we live in a world where suffering goes unrecorded. So I'm not saying it's even a bad thing, but there's a kind of moral conversation that has to happen that comes from doing work there. And I have a very good friend, Scott Anderson, older brother Sean Lee Anderson. The pair of them are, you know, well-known journalists. They've been in a lot of wars. And Scott, this is worth actually looking up, and it's online. He wrote an article that came out in the mid-'90s called Prisoner of War. about the emotional consequences of covering wars for years. And I just remember this one sentence. He said, it's about the sense of guilt. He said, I should be punished for some of the things I've seen. You know, and the rest of the article is just as profound. And so for me, PTSD, as a, you know, in the sort of diagnostic sense, for me, like the consequences of almost getting killed, which has happened to me a couple of times, are minimal compared to the consequences of seeing other people harmed, other people killed, particularly children. Like those images, those moments in my life are still, they are almost unchanged in me and can bring me to tears in moments if I'm not careful. And risking my life is like, it doesn't touch it.
We were talking here in absolutes about, you know, the role, the purpose. It's important also to remember that there is no single reason for any of this, and that you know, we've been focusing on journalism, the manufacture of imagery and distribution of imagery for its current application. But of course, it's got an historic role as well. It's different, and somebody's motive for being in a place won't stop them doing something good or bad in a completely different mental state in that same place. You know, we all fill many roles at the same time. It's not, you know, the white hat and the good, the black hat. All the good guys are bad and all the bad guys are good at different times in our lives.
Yeah. To just, you know, comment on that question, again, you know, Joao Silva, who's always been a fountain of wisdom for me, said, you know, he used to say, you know, the days that we're winning the prizes and getting these front pages, he said, that's the worst day somebody ever had in their whole life.
Yeah.
And he used to repeat that all the time. He's like, that's the worst day someone ever had, and we photographed him. So.
Could I say something about Tim, sort of in that context? So he won the World Press Photo Award for a shot that he took out at Restrepo on his first trip, which was September of '07. And I sort of already knew those guys a little bit, and Tim was new there, and immediately we're, you know, like it went off. Like there was a huge amount of combat almost every day, and it's an amazing photo of a soldier, a guy named Olson, sort of with his hand here, sort of exhausted at the end of a day of fighting, and it sort of captured the futility of the war, I think, in a lot of people's minds. Anyway, when we went back there in January, or in the spring, so Tim had to write his acceptance speech, right? And we were at Camp Blessing waiting to go into the Korengal, and he had to write his speech. And, you know, Tim was a very smart guy and sometimes could be a little bit, I think, too abstract. And so he was writing his speech, and I was bored out of my mind because we were stuck there for days. And I was dying to play chess with him. And I was like, is your speech done yet? Come on, man. Just play a game of chess with me. What you are going crazy. I was so bored, I started playing myself in chess. Like so anyway, he worked on this thing. And he finally finished. He's like, I think I've done it. And I said, oh, I'd love to hear it. So we started reading. And it was so smart and complex and abstract. I had no idea what he was talking about. He was completely theoretical, right? And I was like, Tim, man, I don't know. Maybe you should maybe start again and think about what it feels like to be sort of awarded this high honor for a situation which is also so incredibly painful for so many people, like including you. Like, what's that feel like? And he was like, okay, got it, I'll try. And so then he went back to work, clack, 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 and he had his laptop, and I played more chess with myself, you know, and a couple hours later he said, okay, I think I've done it. And I said, great, I'd love to hear it. And he started reading, and before he got to the end of the first sentence, he was crying so hard he couldn't finish, and I had to read it. That's one of the consequences of doing this work and doing it in a real way, right? And if you don't, and we talked a lot about this because it was exciting as hell out there, right? It was intense. It was incredible. We were making our careers. You know, I mean, it was all these things, right? And Tim the end of the day, we had this talk about it, and we sort of realized, and I wrote about this as well. It's like if you war is all those things. To claim it's not, you're just a liar, right? It is all those things, but it's also incredibly sad. And when you get to that point of it, how sad it is, and Tim got there before I did. When you get, and that's where he got when he wrote that essay. When you get to that place of how, in addition to everything else, also how incredibly sad it is that this is happening. There's a very good chance you want to never have anything to do with it again. And when we finished all that out there, that was where both of us kind of were. And then the Arab Spring started, and it was so compelling, and we were going to go on assignment there. I couldn't go the last minute. And Tim was very much like, you know, I'm interested in what's happening culturally. I'm not interested in the war per se. And but of course, we all were interested in the war per se, you know, and as was he when he got there. And so just to say that there's like this emotional complexity, which is like, it's a hall of mirrors. I mean, just it recedes, it keeps receding to infinity.
Absolutely, yeah. Can we leave this here? And I think you guys will stick around for a few minutes. We've got some food. Everybody's welcome to stay. You can talk amongst yourself. But we've been going for a little over an hour, so I want to thank you guys. Thank you. This is.
Thank you. Yeah.